Hi there. My name is Daniel Irvin, and today I'll be interviewing our esteemed guest, Dr. Pao Lor. Um, it, you know, there's a lot that I could say about Dr. Lor. We've worked closely together for the past year and a half or so. But Pao, if you wouldn't mind giving an introduction of yourself, who you are, what you do.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. Currently I am a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and my role is to prepare future educators, including both teachers to be as well as practicing teachers who are thinking about becoming administrators.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
And could you speak a little bit about your book? Because I mean, you're also an author,
Mhm.
but very multifaceted individual.
Yeah, so I tried to I try to be very versatile in what I do. So having a memoir published in 2022 was you could say a scholarly progression. I've been working on like articles or newspaper articles, which are shorter um, projects to scholarly articles to book chapters. And so a book was just the next phase and the progression. Obviously, you can choose a lot of topics, but I ended up doing a memoir in that with a memoir you can you have a little latitude with creativity
Mhm.
versus sometimes when you strictly look at, let's say, an academic book or an academic manuscript. Um, Sometimes there are very rigid protocols that you have to follow.
Mhm.
And so with a memoir, it's a combination of both. Along with that, it ties well with my qualitative research
Mhm.
anyway. So I would say that aside from that, it's so much larger to put together from, let's say, a book chapter or a peer-reviewed manuscript, where sometimes the focus is very singular in those projects. With a book and with a memoir, there are so many more, you could say, so many more variables that you have to tie together, and just the nature of it, it's a lot different than if you would to um, prepare a manuscript for other scholars as well as for other students, versus you're preparing a manuscript or a book like a memoir for the general public.
Mhm.
And so, but overall, the process has been so enriching for me.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Mhm.
And I guess to start off with, our topic today is just going to be on walking, and particularly walking Hmong. What does walking mean in context of Hmong identity, and what has walking meant in your life? And I guess we'll kind of make three stops on like past, present, and future. And so
Mhm.
start with you know what did walking mean to you in your past? What was the process of walking? What was the impetus? Could you speak to that?
Mhm. It's a fascinating topic when you shared it with me. I have never really thought about, walking in the context of let's say the Hmong American experience.
Mhm.
Um, for for a great part of I would say my parents' generation, prior generation as well, and part of my generation, walking was, you could say walking was the primary transportation to get to anywhere. And um your health was so critical your health as in physically as well as physiologically. So if for whatever reason, there's a setback in one of those two areas, physically or physiologically, then it's a hardship. It's a hardship for yourself. Potentially, it's a hardship for your family because now you can no longer walk, whether it's hunting, walking, going to the farm, going from one village to another. Walking was a necessity. So, for most part of my life, up until even when we had left Laos and arrived in um Thailand and into the US, where now you start seeing other forms of transportation, particularly bicycling, motorcycling, and cars, or your public transportation, with the train, with the buses, with the planes. And so it became so fascinating. But for that first part, yeah, it was truly a necessity. Everywhere you go, yeah, you needed to make certain that, I think for most part, people did not worry about their you could say the state of their health, because walking has always been a part of life. So for most part, people were in pretty good health and physical condition to walk very far distance. You can walk for a day, you can, walk for, basically you walk almost everywhere. So the physical condition wasn't an issue. Most people worried about in case something happens to their feet, or something happens to their legs, or physically, where they're not going to physically perform the act of walking. And so, they did as much as they can to prevent that from happening. Infections, infections to the feet, infections to the legs, other potential health conditions that could prevent them from doing that physical act of walking, so that they could get um, their daily activities, their daily chores, things that were basically necessities, that they needed to do those things with their feet in order for them to live, for their family to survive, and to hopefully one day, many of them hoped of a better life, and walking was a part of that early process to get there.
Yeah. And is there a particular walk from your childhood, like just one walk that like really sticks out to you, as being, because I know there's a lot of events from your childhood, but was there one
Mhm.
walk in particular that just sticks out in your mind?
Um, there's so many of them. Like they're key moments. But I think if there's one, um, for me anyway, the the walk, the walks that I had with my father, they were very memorable. They were memorable for me in that they were happy moments. So the walking, um, in that sense, in that context, because they're happy moments, the long distance of walking seems very short. Like the happy moments that you have with your father, or with anybody significant to you. But for me, yeah, those walks that I had with my father, whether it's to an event or just walking, from one village to another, um, those were for me some of the happiest moments, growing up in the central part of Laos.
Hmm. Nice. And so moving forward, I mean, now, and I understand that, um, what was it, back in October, you actually returned to Laos for the
Mm-hmm.
first time since
Yeah.
1978 or something like that.
Yep, 77.
77, incredible.
Hmm.
And so thinking to the present, to, walking now so many years later, kind of what was stepping on that ground like, retreading those steps.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that point. Because walking, I think too often, particularly here in the United States, too often when we think about walking, we think about walking as and the more than anything else, it's something that we actually have to make time for. And it's been influenced by health more than anything else, that we actually have to find time to walk in order to improve our physical health. But in that context, to have left, that region since 1977, so to go back there and to actually walk. I actually walked the airstrip in Longjiang, the U.S. secret military headquarters there. The same airstrip that was used, for about 15 years, where many U.S. military personnel, were there, and that strip was built, and I think in the 1960s. Um, but it has so much, that particular type of walking has so much significance, not just historically, but spiritually, uh, it's emotionally as well, that you feel, there's like a disconnectedness in your life. And so I think you could fly over it, you can drive through it, but to have walked on it, it's a completely different experience. It's so powerful, it's so moving, and it makes you, I think anyone who has that type of disconnectedness to their past, and just to have that experience again, to walk on it, to touch that piece of ground or that piece of history again, it is an amazing, exhilarating, there's a sense of sadness to it as well. So it's almost like um a meeting of so many emotions and feelings and history and the past and the present and the future, and to think about, and in my case anyway, you can kind of imagine what life was like, and you're walking there and you're like, wow, 50 years ago, my parents were here, and my uncles and other Hmong people were here, and there were U.S. CIA, agents, and there were military personnel from the United States, and the life there. And so to be walking in that history, was just amazing, and that's what walking did for me, just to be there and soak in all of these emotions, history, past, present, what's going on now in Laos, as well as, its connection to the world, to see the people who are living there now, those who lived there, during during that time, and they have the opportunity to go back, as well as those who were born after, and they have no connection with the history there, for them to, it's amazing for me to learn that, they are learning about the past of some of those areas. So walking was fascinating to be back there and walk those areas again.
Yeah, and I think particularly in case of like the Hmong migration, really from Longjing and Jinkung uh, to the Mekong, that journey. And I feel that a lot of people in the West and a lot of Americans would be baffled that the idea of walking without a trail,
Mm-hmm.
walking through wilderness. you know, when we see now, you know, especially people that grew up in the U.S., you know, when we are on a street side or a sidewalk,
Yeah, yeah.
we see no go zone, impassable, no way through, and then just the idea that so many people kind of forge their own path
Mm-hmm.
and their own path to like salvation.
Yeah, that's you know, that's another fascinating point. I got to see we tried as much as we could to be as close to the path that we took, you know, from where we were to eventually to Thailand. And you're absolutely right. For me, on this particular topic, before I wasn't thinking about it, even when I was there. You know, I thought about it, but not this in depth. Which was, you know, I saw the geographical regions for the first time. Like, wow, these mountains are big. You know, these valleys are huge. Like now I understand why growing up, my parents and grandparents would say, you know, three mountains and three valleys seems so vast and so far. And when I was there, I finally, you know, I finally understand it. And you're walking and you look at the terrain, it's just horrifying. You're right, there's no path, and if there is, it's just a little passage through you know, through jungles and forests and mountains and valleys and streams that have never, you know, been touched by humans before. And so, you know, many of the Hmong Americans have to take, particularly Hmong Americans who had Hmong refugees who had to take that path. It's, you know, I've asked why, you know, why did we, you know, why did some Hmong Americans took, why did they take that path when they had other paths? Because that was the most difficult path that anyone could have taken. You know, like why, you know, why put yourself through that? And many, you know, many said that that was the, believe it or not, that was the safest path. The hardest path was the safest path.
Because
And
thought that Lao couldn't follow. They
yes.
dare to follow.
Yeah, and it was something that they knew well because, you know, they have always been in the mountains, the jungles, you know, the jungles were their home. And so they were very familiar with the terrain. They knew it was hard, but they knew it was the safest route. They knew it was going to, you know, take an incredible toll on them. They knew that you know, the Hmong has a saying where um, basically you were exchanging life for death and death for life. And so even with that, you know, which is a testimony to what freedom meant to these Hmong refugees who were willing to leave. You know, I've met people who stayed, and I've asked them why did they stay? And you know, it came down to a few things. One was um, the freedom. There were just some people who were just so much more, um, you could say, so much more hungry for freedom versus the other ones. The other ones were willing to live under certain conditions. Um, Even without the freedom, they were fine, you know, because they were not. Which brings me to the other trait that the refugees who left have, which is the courage. Like I mean, if they had the courage, like they were gonna make it, even if they were not gonna make it. The courage drove them to make that journey. Yeah, you know, we never really thought about walking in in that context of how critical walking was, and that there are people who died because, you know, they caught gangrene or they're, you know, they just they're just so tired from the walking, so exhausted from the walking that they couldn't walk anymore. And so walking in that context was the main, you could say, like the if there's a secret ingredient that got Hmong refugees from where they were to the United States, that the secret ingredient is walking.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, about how many miles would you say?
It's roughly over 220 miles.
Wow.
Yeah, through some of the toughest terrains in the world.
I can
And then
elevation changes.
yes, yep. There's like elevations, the types of jungle, the rivers, like depending on the season that they embark on the journey. Most try to. So this is where it's tricky. If you leave during low seasons, during the dry season, the enemies know that you're coming. So you have to be super cautious. If you go during the monsoon season, yeah, you're not gonna have much of the enemy to deal with. But then now you have the environment to deal with. The river, it's the rivers are amazing between dry season and raining season. It's almost like, yeah, during dry season you can even a little kid can just cross to the other side. During the monsoon season, it's almost, I mean, you go from a level 1 to like a level 10.
Mhm.
And so, those are some of the um uh challenges that Hmong refugees had to deal with. And it all comes down to, can you walk?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Can your feet take you where you need?
Yep. Can your feet take you?
It's incredible.
Yeah. And I think in my book, I referenced something to that effect where, in that world that I grew up, your world is only as far as your feet can take you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
fast. Now, and I'd like to move this to the future and really into, spiritually being Hmong and the still fairly widely practiced animistic belief of, what the afterlife is. And I'm particularly interested in what walking means after death.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, the like death rites where shamans will give past Hmong individuals like directions to where they need to go back to their first home. And
Mm-hmm.
in essence, it's walking the soul back to their origin place.
Yeah, that's an intriguing topic that I don't think anyone has ever thought of. In fact, um, I don't think people have ever imagined that you walk back, you
Mm,
know, where Hmong people call it, what do they call it? I think it's try to think of it. It's been a while. Um, yeah, I think it's called Bao Gate, Bao Gate or something like that, where yeah, you take the spirit back, to all the major places that you lived. And you know, that's a great point. It's almost where I think we have never really thought about um how a a spirit is led back to all these different places other than you just teleport, where um you just leave this person say, oh, you were here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. One of your last places, like for sure, if you stay in Ban Vinai, the refugee camps where many monks stayed, like they go there, and then um it's interesting. I've never thought it from that perspective, because normally they'll just go to these places, and then they'll ask this individual like, hey, you're here in let's say Ban Binai refugee camp. Do you have any arch enemy here or anything that you owe any debt that you need to pay, or you're good to go. Like, you didn't, have any bad karma here. And then if it is, they'll ask like, hey, is there anyone here, any spirits here that this person owes you, does this person owe any inhabited, spirits here, any money, any grudges, whatever it is. And then, they'll say, well, if you do say something, if not, we're moving on. And then they'll repeat it for several times. And if there's nothing, and they just move on, it's just though they just fly from one to another. And even when they're there, that's a great question about walking. Like, do they go to the different places? Because eventually eventually the person leads you to the gateway of heaven and hell. And there is here's where I think the significance is. When a person passed away, they give you a special pair of shoes.
Oh.
Yeah. And this is where I think walking comes in. I'm glad you asked. Because you do get especially if you're still, follow traditions and religious practices, cultural practices. So you get a very special pair of shoes, where these particular shoes are for you to wear. There's in the journey, I'm not very good with this, but in the journey, there's a section in the journey in which you're going to travel where there are like Hmong people call it ganji, it's like caterpillars, sticky, many sticky caterpillars. I don't know whether it's just a metaphor for something else, but you're gonna walk through a section of the journey until you get to China, where it's going to be desert, it's going to be hot. It's just incredibly horrendous, and you need these special pair of shoes, because when you came to this world, you did not have shoes, but because your ancestors left that original place to come to Laos, they had to travel through a region in which, it was just there are no trees, it's hot, it's extremely horrendous. And so you need, because when we think about, going back to your point about walking, Hmong people have never thought about walking with shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so shoes, until we were introduced to modernization, everybody walked bare feet. And that's the reason why when you passed away and they're taking you back to the gate, to eventually to the gate, to go to heaven or to go to hell, you get a special pair of shoes for that stretch of the road.
Wow, that's incredible. So I
Yeah.
that the journey takes you all the way back to the origin of the Hmong people into China.
Yes.
I never heard that actually before.
Yeah. So in that last moment, they will tell you not to look down. They will tell you not to look back, because that's where, when you're right at that threshold between heaven and hell. And apparently the way I visualize it, the way that I've heard it a few times, it's like there's a ladder that you're going to climb to heaven. And when you do climb up, that you cannot look down. You cannot look back. That you just gotta go. Because if you look back, there's the possibility that Satan will grab you and take you to the underworld.
Is that Tunyong?
Zunyong, yeah, that's right, Zunyong. Yeah. So the Hmong have always had this version of the devil, and in many ways, it's very, you could say, it's been influenced obviously by popular media. We really, have you seen the Clash of the Titans in the 1980s?
No, I'm not, but I know of it.
Yeah, so that version of Greek mythology of Pegasus and Andromeda and the vulture, and I forgot who what's his name is, but the character, the evil character. When the monks saw that in the 1980s, yeah, the elders told us that that's exactly what Xinjiang looks like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's funny when you were telling me that, it reminded me of the story of Orpheus, where he goes down to find, his betrothed loved one into hell, and he gets her, but the rule is that he can't look back at her or else she'll be gone forever.
yeah. And it's I'm not so much into it because I did not for example, like my wife and I, she grew up in a Hmong household.
Mhm.
So her Hmong is so much better than mine.
Mhm.
And that, she'll hear things and she's like, oh, she'll tell me that, oh, you have never heard that before. I'm like, no, I've never heard that before. Um, and she was surprised that I've never heard, certain sayings in Hmong. But yes, Hmong people have that version as well. It's the Dante's Inferno.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Hmong people.
Fascinating. I'd love to keep talking about it. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I just like to pose like the last bit of walking, which I mean, we in like the spiritual context, which we talked
Hmm.
about, special pair of shoes,
Yeah,
even during the calling of the soul, who please,
yeah.
when shamans essentially enter the spirit world and roam, walk, even though if they are on the horse, from what I understand it, they roam the spirit world looking for wandering
Hmm.
souls. And so, there's this whole spirit world that's just teeming with walking souls. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
and that,
you get going back to you get two pair of shoes. There's the nice pair of shoes that they give you, and then the pair of shoes that you're going to use during that stretch of the road. It's actually just a sandal, it's a pair of sandals, sometimes made of strings.
wow.
Yeah, because apparently it's hot.
I,
And
I,
so
I bet.
yeah, it's hot, so you just want a pair of sandals.
Mhm, mhm. Keep it.
Yeah, but it's fascinating the other shoes that you have, which when you start looking at those pair of shoes, it's um it's very similar to shoes in the Middle East.
Mm,
And some people have argued that with Hmong, especially Hmong women, and they have on Behua, we call it puara,
mhm.
with where during New Year's and they put that on the turban. That I've read somewhere where perhaps that's the some of the origin or some of the origin of where Hmong came from.
Well, I mean, I know that where the Hmong are supposed to originally have resided in China,
Mm-hmm.
is like along at one point in time was along the Silk Road, where there
Mm-hmm.
was influence coming from the Middle East. Therefore, because at one point in history, the Hmong actually sided with Muslim minority groups in China against
Mm-hmm.
against the Chinese Empire.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, the Hmong have sided with so many people.
You want to fight against the imperial power?
Yeah, yeah. There's stories of Hmong people building the Great Wall.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Incredible. Well, unfortunately, this seems like all the
Yep.
time that we have. Thank you so much for talking with me. It's been an absolutely fascinating subject, and I'll love
Yeah.
to talk about it more with you in private. But for the sake of this recording, I will talk to you again, or I guess as the saying goes in Hmong, "Jing
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure. I've never really thought about this topic, in the context of the Hmong experience. So this was most fascinating for me.
Thank you so much, and
Thank you so much. See you, Daniel.
I